So the Astra Militarum have got a 40k rules update today. Some good and bad news for the Guard here. Double special weapons and Cadian squads are banned. The Aegis defense line has been fixed. Officers in Chimeras are more powerful than ever, and Creed has been nerfed a little. Let's talk about what we've got. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about Games Workshop's update document for the Imperial Guard Codex and the rules changes that lie in store within for the Astra Militarum. The Guard Codex has been out for a fair while now. A couple of weeks back they dropped that FAQ for all the Forge World units and made quite a lot of them a bit more usable with the current Guard rules. I was expecting them to update the main FAQ and Errata for the Codex at the same time, but for some reason it's been a bit delayed. It's only coming out now, and it's basically a page full of clarifications, FAQ and Errata for the Codex, answering a few obvious questions. For the most part, I'd say with the Guard Codex they haven't done too badly to have most things working as intended. There were a few things that looked like obvious typos, or a couple of slightly odd rules that they have clarified here. I would bear in mind though that this is the update to change rules to make them functional, and it's not a balance pass that's going to be aiming to change points costs or the way that rules work within the book, as they weren't doing what Games Workshop expected. It means there aren't any improvements for things like Kazachan jungle fighters, and nothing to hurt that big Kazakin mortal wound combo, but I wouldn't expect either of those things at this stage. If they did want to change things around a bit, it'd be at the next balanced data slate, probably sometime in April. Still though, there are some relevant changes here, a couple of nerfs and a couple of buffs, nothing that's going to change the faction too fundamentally, but might shift around the exact ways that you field units on the table maybe. First up, I'd say perhaps the single most competitively relevant thing is that you can't double up special weapons on the Cadian Shock Troops datasheet or the Death Corps of Krieg datasheet anymore. They basically changed that thing saying you can't take more than 2 of the same weapon on one unit to you can't take more than 1 of the same weapon on one unit. And this wasn't really unexpected, to be honest. I was almost certain that it was a typo when the Codex came out. It just didn't make sense as it didn't reflect what was in the kit, Games Workshop being a big fan of their no model, no rules policy. I was kind of surprised at the amount of people who seemed to think that it was intended for the Cadian shock troops, whereas to me it just looked like it had been copy-pasted from the Kazakin datasheet. It is a bit annoying, of course. I think it was quite nice to be able to field Cadian shock troops with double special weapons just for quality of life purposes. It does seem though that they are continuing to pursue their no model no rules policy, and now the datasheets do reflect the special weapon choices that you get in the box. Realistically, I still think it means that Cadian shock troops are still going to be the go-to troops, and rather than taking double plasma as quite a lot of lists seem to be, then I think that plasma melter will probably be the way to go now. The melter gun does have its advantages, particularly if you get anywhere near a hard hitter at less than 6-inch range, but not being able to double up is kind of annoying. Next up, in some slightly better news, the Aegis defense line has been fixed. This one was perhaps the single most obvious thing that needed a fix when the Codex came out. Its rules just didn't really work as it was classified as area terrain. It meant that units could only get cover from it if they were actually standing on that little central platform bit of it. The rest of the fortification was basically useless, and Games Workshop has made the obvious fix for this one, just counting it as an obstacle terrain feature, so infantry beasts and swarms less than 3 inches behind it can get cover. And with the Aegis defense line special rule, you get the +1 to your save and then a further +1 on top of that, meaning that you could have a 3+ save on your standard guardsmen against ranged attacks, or 2+ save for things like Kazakin or Scions. Nice to see that it's actually usable, but I would say that it's still going to be a bit on the niche side, I think. The general 40k deployment rules are still going to get in this thing's way a bit on a lot of crowded tables where there's big terrain. Generally, you're not allowed to set up fortifications that are within 3 inches of other bits of terrain, and it can be really limiting for a big bit like this. On boards where you can deploy it though, I think it's usable enough. It is really quite cheap. Not the worst thing to have covering an exposed home objective, for example. Guardsmen will be a bit harder to remove with this. Next up was an interesting FAQ to officers ordering things from Chimeras. Again, I was wondering whether or not Games Workshop might prohibit this, but it seems like they've gone the other way and specifically said that you can do it. Basically, the Chimera's got a mobile command vehicle special rule. That one means that you can issue an order from it from an officer inside it in the command phase, and then the weird part was that when you get out of the vehicle, you're also allowed to issue orders from the officer that just got out. Typically could be focused on units that just got out of the Chimera alongside them. And it did seem just a little bit weird that you could basically have more orders from starting the turn within a Chimera, do the one from the mobile command vehicle special rule, and then do your normal set of orders once you got out. However, Games Workshop have just clarified that yes, it does indeed work like this. If you have an officer that starts a turn in a Chimera and then gets out alongside a squad, basically they're going to be able to get one more than their normal amount of orders, which could give you a little bit more flexibility. Generally a small amount of good news for mechanised armies, I think. Not sure that this really makes a whole load of intuitive sense though. I know that Chimeras are good for broadcasting orders about, but arbitrarily getting in and out of one in one turn seems a bit weird that it should boost your command abilities. Certainly doesn't hurt though, Chimeras are still looking like prime real estate for officers. Next up, there's a slightly convoluted change to Ursula Creed and her orders. This one's maybe a little bit technical, but I think that the upshot is that it's a bit of a nerf to say if she wanted to buff a bunch of mortar teams. One of her main unique datasheet special rules is that if she orders a unit, they get +1 strength on their ranged weapons. It is quite commonly used for mortar squads to get them all the way up to strength 6 while she sits at the back with them. But the way that the rule's worded, in combination with the voice of command rules, it actually has to be the unit that she's specifically ordered to get that +1 strength buff, and not one that's had like a splash order applied to it. Say where you've ordered one unit, and then the units nearby also get the same copy of that order from regimental tactics. It still meant that with her 3 orders, you could get 3 different mortar squads, all going up to strength 6. The way that you do it is issue a different order to each one of those mortar units, but then make the last order that you issued from her be the take aim one, and use the splash effect to go onto the previous 2. That way you could have 3 different mortar teamers, all with take aim and +1 strength. As rules as written, they'd still get the +1 strength bonus from her having ordered them in the turn, even if she's effectively cancelled that previous order with one of her second ones. Now Games Workshop have chipped in with this FAQ, and they basically say that if the order is replaced with a second order, then you no longer get the +1 strength boost. I believe the upshot of this is that no matter how you wangle it, you can only get 1 mortar unit with both take aim and +1 strength now. The other units will be getting one or the other, either if she issues take aim as a splash order, or if you issue take aim as just the one unit, so they get +1 strength and take aim, and the other units you tell them to do something else, they get the +1 strength but not take aim. Overall, I think that this makes her just a little bit less useful. It was quite handy just to have her sat around with a bunch of mortar units, putting all of them on strength 6. I still think that she's useful, but I feel like she's probably lost some ground on things like the Cadian Command Squad and the Cadian Castellan, as this is the main attraction to running her over one of those in my opinion. It's still a good boost, but now is it going to be a bit better just on one given unit, maybe some Kazakin or Sentinels perhaps. I'd consider those for perhaps the biggest rules updates, but there are a small slew of others. They made a minor tweak to the wording for the Militarum plasma cannon, which basically said that the bearer takes a mortal wound if they roll a 1. They've changed that to the bearer's unit taking a mortal wound, as otherwise you could have a situation where you have multiple different sentinels damaged at once. That would usually be against the core 40k rules. For the Valkyrie, they added in a bit that they missed off. They forgot to include the standard airborne ability that's present on just about all flyers. That's the one for rules regarding charging them, that you can only attack them with fly units, for example. For the Tempestus Scions, they made a small wording change regarding their pistol weapons. They just had the wording slightly wrong, as his default armament is a las pistol, where they said it was a bolt pistol. It doesn't really change that much, and they can still just take a hotshot plasma or bolt pistol on the sergeant. For units that can take an additional doctrine somehow, they've clarified that trophy hunters can be taken on Kazakin or bought in with an additional tank ace trait, so it would allow you to use that one on top of your normal doctrines. It's the one that gives you +1 strength against monsters and vehicle units, so it isn't too bad I guess. It's a bit situational though as to whether or not you expect to run into loads of those or lots of infantry armies. I feel like more people might just be sticking with the single reroll type one, or mechanised, or ignores cover or extra range. Finally, there's a couple of small clarifications to the field promotion stratagem. This is the one that you can use if your warlord gets killed. Another officer on the board basically takes over as warlord and generates a new trait that's allowed in the book. They have clarified a couple of things about that trait. Old Grudges doesn't work for it. It didn't really rules as written in the first place. Obviously you have to select the target at the start of the first battle round. By the time you're using this, that has passed. And they also clarified that you can't select the same warlord trait as the model that was just killed that you're replacing. I feel like that one was maybe a little bit less obvious. I guess it might have been rules as written already, as they state it must be given a warlord trait that the model could have taken anyway. I guess it's helpful enough to be clarified though. Overall, I wouldn't really consider any of these particularly massive updates. Trophy Hunters being clarified I think is kind of useful. Everything else kind of made sense already really, and it may be just minor bug fixes. Overall, good to get a few useful clarifications for the Guard. I think that losing the double special weapons on the Cadian shock troops is kind of a shame, but it certainly felt like a typo at the time to be honest. Having the Aegis defense line usable is pretty good, as that was basically broken before. Officers jumping out of Chimeras and throwing orders around is pretty nice, and I think it's a bit of a shame about Ursula Creed not being able to spam take aim and +1 strength on multiple units. That was kind of the main draw to fielding her in the first place. Let me know your thoughts though. Will any of these changes really alter your lists all that much? Look forward to hearing your opinions down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep up with Games Workshop's news and rules updates, so feel free to check back later or subscribe if you'd like to see more. If you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. The channel's Patreon is what allows me to keep on making these videos quite so regularly like this, so if you are enjoying, any support is massively appreciated. I do try and give some rewards for people backing the channel as well. You get to see certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.